Hi, I'm Mary Lyons, the Wealth Woman.
And I'm Eric Alexander with Benchmark Income Group.
Welcome to the Big Wealth Podcast.
So today we are super excited. We're going to play a game that we've been playing for probably 12, 15 years now. But it's one of my favorite games. We're going to walk through what we call the income game, which is basically where do you rank as far as your income, and then really have a conversation around what it means to have a growth mindset as it relates to really everything, but particularly finance.
So let's start with this. I think one of the things that's absolutely key as we are trying to make decisions about our own finances is understanding context. Where is your income in terms of the national averages or in terms of your peers for that matter? And having that context, I think frequently changes the way people approach wealth building. And so I just want to ask the question up front, do you think that your income is common or do you think it's uncommon? And we're going to play a little game for you to find out. So I want you just for a minute as you are listening to think about the entire US population by household. So let's start by defining household. A household is one housing unit. So that could be a single person in their 20s. It could be a single person in their 70s, 50s, whatever age group. It could be a husband and a wife that have no kids living in one household, or it could be an entire family living in one household. So when we think of household, it is not just one earner, although in some cases it is. It could be two earners, or it could be even more than that if you have more earners in your household. But so if you think about that, the first question that we want to ask is, what do you think a household has to earn to be right in the middle at the 50% mark? So half of the households in the entire US earn above this number, and half of the households earn below this number.
Yeah,
and we frequently, we get guesses that are all over the map. And you may, as a listener, you may already know this information, or you could be thinking, geez, I have no idea. Just take a wild stab at it. Don't overthink it. And don't Google it while we're playing the game either. This is the purpose of this is to go with your gut reaction here, because that's what we're measuring.
And if you're driving, don't look down at your phone.
Right. So the second question that we're going to ask here is, what does it take to be in the top 25%? So 75% of the households in the United States earn below this number, and 25% of the households in the United States earn above this number.
Right.
You want to do the next one, Eric?
Yeah. And so this one's a fun one because it starts to get into what we kind of feel is sort of rarefied air, but this is the 10% number. So this is the idea that 10% of the population earn more than this number, and then 90% of the households in the US earn less than this number. So what income would you need as a household at that 10% mark for the 10% number? So spoiler alert, it's more than the people earning at the 25% bracket, just in case you didn't know that. And then now that you've figured that one out, or now that you've kind of mentally wrote that down in your head or on a sheet of paper, now go to the next one. What does it take to be in the top 5%? So 5% of the population earns more, 95% of the population or the households in the US earn less than this number.
So this could be a single earner, it could be a dual earning household, It could be a family, right? Now, what do you think it actually takes from an income perspective to be in the top 1% of all households, regardless of age, in the entirety of the United States, right? This is the 1% that we hear about on the news all the time. It includes Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Oprah Winfrey, any number of people that we see in the media on a regular basis. All right, now we're going to go through and do the big reveal. Get ready. In order to be at the 50% mark for the household, the number is 43,000. So half of the households in the United States make less than $43,614 a year. And then the other half of the households earn above that. So that
The question is,
could be a single earner. It could be a single mom raising, 4 kids. It could be a dual income household. It could be a single person who's working and supporting the entirety of their family. But that is right in the middle, right there.
and the interesting part of this is it doesn't matter how much that'll buy you, because this is the national average. So 43,000, and I'm making up states now, West Virginia might buy more or less things than 43,000 in Malibu, California.
Right.
But it's just the income.
All right. To be in the top 25% of all earners by household, the number is 87,044. So if you earn more than 87,000 a year as an individual, you are in the top 25% all by yourself. But again, these are household numbers.
Right.
So 75% of the population by household earns less than 87,000, and 25% earns more than that.
And what is it at 10?
So here there's a pretty big jump. It jumps up to 151,935. So if you're kind of following along from 50 to 25, we saw roughly 100% jump. And then to get from 25 to 10, we're seeing roughly 100% jump as well. Not quite, but rough math.
Right.
So if you by yourself or combined with your spouse, if you're making more than 152,000, I hope you're patting yourself on the back right now, because this is that rarefied air that Eric just mentioned.
Right. And then the 5s. There you go.
To be in the top 5% of earners by household, the number is 217,913. So if you're earning more than 217 to 18 in your household, that puts you in the top 5% of all households in the entirety of the United States. And now the big reveal that everyone has been waiting for, $540,009. So I'm just going to round down and call that 540. That is the income that your household needs to make in order to be in the top 1%. So here's what I think is interesting. In all of our conversations with clients, in that kind of range, the people who make between, I'll call it 87 or 90,000 for their household, and that 540,000 number, right? So that range in there. If I ask you, and I want you to think about this answer for yourself, do you feel rich? Almost everybody I talk to in that space says, I don't feel rich, but maybe they feel comfortable. But they're looking at their neighbors and they're looking at the things that they want. And when you ask the question and answer it again for yourself, do you feel rich? The answer is frequently no. Here's what I'll tell you. If you are earning more than $150,000 per household, you have the potential to be rich, whether you feel that way or not, right? And even if you're earning less than that right now, if you do the right things, you still have the potential to be rich, to be part of the wealthy or the ultra wealthy, but it takes changing your mindset.
Right.
So I'm going to read, I'm going to paraphrase a quote from a speaker I heard earlier this week. It is human nature to be scared of things that you have never heard of or that lack social proof. Right? I think that's incredibly true, because I am also guilty of making purchases on Amazon based on the ratings that it has gotten, right? I'm looking for social proof that this is a good
crowdsourcing your purchasing.
Exactly, right? But how many of us actually do that because it makes us feel safe? And the reality is, when it comes to your finances, if I am crowdsourcing among my peers, I am going to be doing the things that my peers are doing. And if I actually want to move up in terms of my annual income, whether that's coming from passive sources or whether it's earned income, And if I want to create true wealth, rather than looking at what my neighbor is doing, right, I should be looking for advice from people who are in that top 1%, if that is where I want to move, right? It is all about having a growth mindset.
Right. Well, and the thing I find interesting on that side of it is, I think if you're in that, I'm going to call it the 10% bracket there, you're making 150. And that idea of, and I think you nailed it, right? I may not feel rich by all objective standards, you are, but you may not feel it, but you're comfortable. You can pay the bills, hopefully, if you've not gotten too over your skis as far as expenses, but you're not worrying about where your next meal is coming from, but from where you are versus where everybody else is. If you really understand that number, to me, there's that sense of guilt that starts kind of creeping in. Like, what have I done with my wealth? What have I done with this opportunity? Am I taking advantage of it? And how do I know if I've taken advantage of it? How do I know if I'm where I should be on that side of it?
Right. I think what's really interesting about this is, I think I shared an article with you, was that a week ago, 2 weeks ago? It was an article that I read specifically about, they called it the top 9.9%. So they eliminated the 0.1 at the very upper echelon from the article itself. And they were focused on that 9.9% that comes right below that 0.1. And the article itself, I'm gonna stay away from the political side of things. But it was really interesting to read, in part because I think sometimes what happens is that rather than looking to people who are ahead of where we are right now, whether it's that 9.9 or whether it's the 0.1 that is truly the ultra wealthy, we tend to look at that, and rather than saying, how can I move my family up in the world, it is easy to look at it from the perspective of, those people suck, they're doing terrible things, that sort of thing. And I'm not going to say that all those people are great people, because I don't know all of them, right? But the reality is, regardless of where your income falls, there are things to be learned from people who have progressed beyond where you are.
Right. Well, and I think I think it's interesting. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because if you really think about resentment has been with us since Cain and Abel, right? And it didn't work out so well for Abel on that side of it, but it's not a new thing to go look at people that are in a better spot than you and say, man, they must have done something maybe nefarious, or they're doing bad things to get there, versus saying, what can I learn about what they're doing so that I can move into that space? And it's hard to have that humility.
Well, you nailed it, right? So humility is the key here, because there's something that you and I talk about, I think, fairly frequently, called the Dunning-Kruger Syndrome.
Yeah, no doubt.
Which is the idea that the smarter you are, the more you realize you don't know. And the less intelligent you are, the more you think you are competent in areas that you may not be, right? So I think humility and Dunning-Kruger sometimes go hand in hand, right? They're motivated. Dunning-Kruger, I think, is sometimes motivated by insecurity. And so this is the key, is asking other people with an open mind, almost with that beginner's mindset, regardless of how far along you are, asking other people, that are where you want to be, what they did and how they got there, and never shutting off or closing down to any ideas that feel new or different, because frequently those are the ideas that really take off.
Well,
right?
And it reminds
me. Help.
Yeah, well, and it reminds me, you and I have talked about Ted Lasso, I think 4 million times now, that I've
over and over again. Yeah.
Finally gotten on board. And it was funny. I watched both seasons already. I'm done with it. And I'm getting my wife watching through it now. I'm like, I'm going to watch this all over again just so I can be here when you watch it. And we just ended this episode where he's doing this dart game. And so I'm not going to spoil the episode for you, but he says, it's fascinating. And I think it was Walt Whitman that gave the quote, right? Most people aren't curious, they're judgmental. And I think there's so much wisdom in that. It's like, suspend some of the disbelief or suspend some of the judgment. And if you can walk into every situation of what can I learn? How can I grow? Even if you're like, I'm not sure about this guy or this girl, like morally or ethically, or maybe I just don't care for them, but there's something I can learn from this interaction. What is it?
Right.
I think that's that mindset.
And let's be clear, we're not saying like, be open and just take everything at face value. I think it's healthy to be skeptical. I think it's very healthy to be skeptical.
Absolutely.
It is unhealthy, however, to be cynical, right? And there's a fine line between those two. And so I find that in life, when I am closed-minded, I miss opportunity. And when I am open-minded, I find opportunity where I didn't expect it. And I think that there has to come a time where, I think you see this frequently happening on social media more and more, is that people end up in a closed loop, I think is the name for it, where they just keep seeing information that validates their own conclusions, as opposed to
echo chamber.
Looking across the spectrum of, could this be different? And I find if you start looking for advice about finances, that depending on both income and net worth, and I'm going to use quotes, trusted sources for financial advice, who they're turning to varies radically by both net worth and income, right? And some of that is because the marketing is targeted maybe to a specific demographic, but I think a large portion of it is because they're looking at their peers and they end up in a closed loop of people who are in the same brackets. And so what happens is, if you're looking at all your neighbors and they're all doing the same thing, that's probably what you're going to do too, because you've gotten your social proof, as opposed to looking at, okay, how do I find the people who have made multiple millions in their lifetime and who have high incomes that provide them freedom of lifestyle? What are they doing? Right. And not just what is one of them, like what is one person doing, but like, let's find 100 people. And I think what happens is it's hard to get access to those people and we're intimidated, right? I mean, talking to someone who has substantially more money than you about what you're doing with your money is scary, because they might tell you that you're doing something stupid, right? And then you feel like, oh, am I losing credibility? Or why would someone at that income level want to talk to me? And here's the thing that I know is that people who have had success in their life want to share it, right? Now, they don't want people who are just standing there with a handout saying, give me, give me, give me, right? But if they find somebody who has potential, who they enjoy from a personal standpoint, they will frequently offer mentorship, right? And again, this goes to like being open-minded and reaching out when you need help, and then finding the area, like the groups or the areas that those people are gravitating to, so that they do provide income. And I'm going to go back to this idea of growth mindset. Even if you have explored certain financial concepts before in your life and come to specific conclusions, if you upgrade the caliber of advisor that you are talking to, you might come to a totally different conclusion. And I say that because frequently when I look at some of the strategies that we talk about, our clients will say, I've heard about this from at least one or two other advisors, and I chose not to move forward because they couldn't explain it in a way that actually made sense. Right. And they're like, now that I've had this conversation and I've seen the evidence and the data, I realize I probably should have done this 10 or 20 years ago, but I'm excited that I get to do it right now.
If I had a nickel for every time I heard that, right?
Right. And it's frequently from people who've explored some of the concepts, but the person who was teaching it didn't have the knowledge base that they needed. So I'm going to stay away from taxes here, but I'm going to go through this really quickly because I think it's very important. What I want to talk about is the percentage of taxes paid by each income bracket. So if you look at the top 1% of all earners in the country, remember that's households earning over $540,000, they pay roughly 40% of all the taxes that are collected in the US. So this idea that the 1% doesn't pay taxes, I think is almost complete BS. The people I know that are not paying taxes are the 0.1%, right? Because they have completely different income sources and available deductions. But again, if you personally don't like paying taxes, it may be time to emulate what that top 0.1% is doing, right? And then if you look at kind of the next tier down, the top 5% of the population, which includes the top 1% of the population, is paying about 60% of the taxes collected. So that means if the top 1% is paying 40% of the taxes, the next 4% below them is paying about 20% of all the taxes being collected.
Right.
So
I think it's fascinating at that point, you drop to 10%. So that for that top 10%, so the top 1% is paying 40, top 5% inclusive of the top 1 is 60. And when you get down to the top 10, it's only about 70%, 71%, 71.37 technically. So that next 5% or that next 4% is really only paying another, what, 11%.
Right. At 25, it's 86, almost 87%. And then at the 50% mark, that's about 97% of all the taxes being collected. And so when you start looking at the people who are in the top 25% of all earners in the country, they are responsible for paying almost 87% of the taxes being collected by the US. What that tells me is that if you have the potential to be wealthy, because remember, this is income, this is not net worth, and this is not necessarily passive income either, is that if you have the potential to become wealthy, you are going to be hit the hardest by taxes in this country. So the efficiency of your overall tax strategy and investment choices becomes incredibly important if you want to build wealth that is available for your lifetime and, for that matter, the next generation. Because if you have the ability to build wealth, you get to personally make the choice of whether your family for generations stays in the middle class or moves into the upper classes. And I think a mistake that sometimes we make about money is that there's a quote, money is the source of all evil. And I think I'm actually misquoting that. It's the love of money is the source of all evil. But I also think that capital is freedom. And so if you have capital and you look at it as a tool, because no tool is going to be good or evil. How you use the tool is what determines its morality. And I'm going to say that again, right? If we look at money as just a tool, it is amoral, not immoral, amoral. It is not good or bad. It is what you do with the money that makes that determination. Right. And so if you want to be in a place where you are creating true wealth, you need to be tax sensitive. So, Eric, if you think of just kind of the top 3 places that you can get tax-free access to your money as it grows, what are the 3 things that come to mind?
Yeah. And before I answer that question, not that we're going to go to commercial here, but I wanted to drop one more quote in because I didn't want to miss it. There was a great quote, and I can't remember the book that it came out of, but he says, if you really think about it, how absurd it is, the pressure and the awe and the inspiring thing that we put with money. This is change the word out money and put in hammers. This is the love of hammers is the root of all evil. Well, that's just ridiculous, right? If I only had more hammers, I would be happy. Right. And if you think through and you just replace it with whatever sentence is running through your brain when you think and talk to yourself about money, replace money with hammers and verify whether that makes sense or not.
So the book that came from is a book called Super Coach. And I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but I will tell you, in terms of evaluating your mindset about money, the chapter in that book, Super Coach, that discusses money is phenomenal for self-evaluation, right?
Yeah, it was life-changing on that side. So back to your original question, now that we're back from our paid sponsor. So the number three of the kind of the top asset classes that we look at whenever we're thinking about sort of tax-free income on the way out. Real estate is an amazing one. Real estate is one of the coolest vehicles out there from a standpoint of being able to move money through, being able to generate money on the back end in a very, very, very tax efficient way. The second one off the top of my head is really a Roth IRA, or what sometimes gets referred to when you're funding it as a backdoor Roth. And we can talk about that more in just a second, but Roth IRAs are great. You put the money in post-tax, you pay tax before you put it in, and the money grows tax-free all the way through as it's growing. And when you pull it out tax-free. And then the third one on that side, if it's structured right on the back end for income, is insurance. Life insurance has a way to deliver income out on the back end without having to pay tax if you structure the flow correctly.
And
So
again,
those to me are the easy three.
And that is permanent policies that build cash value specifically.
Correct.
Right.
Right, yeah, term has no cash. So yeah.
Right. It'll give you a tax-free death benefit as long as it's within,
Correct.
The currently decided estate exclusion amount,
Right.
but it doesn't actually build the ability to access cash during your lifetime from a tax-free perspective. So we just kind of wanted to hit on some of those. If those are not things that you've explored before, we highly, highly recommend that you look into those things and see if it would be appropriate for your family. But again, right. the point of all of this is to understand, do you have the potential to be wealthy? I'm going to argue that regardless of where you fell in this income game, the answer is yes, if you are willing to have an open mind and approach money from a growth mindset and begin to learn ways that you can do that outside of maybe the traditional advice that's given on a day-to-day basis. Eric, do you want to add anything as we're wrapping up?
Yeah, I'll close with one thing. Whenever I first saw this chart, the mentor that showed this to me says, if you're in the top 25 all the way up to the top 1%, you may not feel wealthy, but there's a little underfunded organization called the IRS that thinks you are, and you've got rings on your back and you don't work at Target. So you've got to be smarter at that point because you're in the crosshairs.
If we can help in any way, please reach out to us. You can find me at The Wealth Woman on Instagram or Facebook. Feel free to shoot me a DM, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn as well. And on Facebook and Instagram, I am Economics with Eric, and you can DM me as well there. Thank you, guys.
Have a great day.